What's up guys, Jay here and welcome back to another weapon guide video. If you're new to this series, here we go into a bit more detail as to how the different weapons each of the classes have access to function, as well as the kinds of overclocks they have and what they do. So far we've covered the driller's flamethrower and the gunner's autocannon. This time however, we're going to go over a weapon that's a bit more intricate and a lot more sci-fi, the engineer's LOK-1 Smart Rifle. So if you guys are ready, let's talk about the Smart Rifle and the kinds of tricks and overclocks it has access to so you could see if it's the primary weapon to add to your build. By the way, if you like this video and want to see more, be sure to subscribe to the channel, that way you never miss another upload.
Time for a cold one once this is done.
As always, before we get into the nitty-gritty, we need to make sure that we have a decent understanding of the Smart Rifle before going super deep into its overclocks. The Smart Rifle is the third primary weapon the engineer has access to, so you will need to play the engineer a good amount before you get your hands on it. Once you do, however, you will see the kinds of potential and power this weapon has. The LOK-1 Smart Rifle, or Loki Rifle as I like to call it, is a heavily augmented submachine gun, and it is also one of the few weapons in the game that has an alternative firing mode, although it's a lot more unique. Tapping the fire button will cause a single shot to be fired normally, while holding down the button will cause a targeting interface to appear and begin placing target indicators onto enemies within range, along with visible tracers that lead from the gun barrel to the enemy itself. When you release the button, the weapon fires at all enemies that were locked onto, with the amount of bullets corresponding to the number displayed on each indicator. When a locked on enemy is killed, any excess locks will not cause additional bullets to be fired, so you don't have to worry about wasting any extra ammo. Basically, just think of this as a rifle version of the Smart Pistol from Titanfall if you've ever played that. When using the smart firing mode, bullets follow the path of the tracer, which means that firing at weak points will require you to position the tracers appropriately. This also means that anything blocking the tracer will be impacted instead, which can include terrain, teammates, or other enemies. The smart rifle has some interesting characteristics to it, and understanding the lock-on system can be somewhat complicated, so I'll try to explain it the best I can. The smart rifle will target all enemies in its scanning range, prioritizing enemies closest to the center of the crosshair, and will not target passive or friendly creatures. Holding the trigger will initiate scanning mode to target enemies and acquire locks. This is visually represented on screen by a loading bar with the text scanning. The rifle will display a trajectory highlighting the bullet pathfinding for each locked enemy. The orange glowing line can be manipulated by continuing to hold down the lock button and changing the player's perspective. This allows targeting specific areas on enemies. The maximum angle the view can be turned before locks disengage is governed by the lost lock threshold stat, which we'll talk about more in the overclock section. After releasing the trigger, the weapon begins firing on each locked target.
Identify targets and exterminate. That's how it's done.
Now we are moving over to the overclocks themselves, and the Smart Rifle has some good ones. Currently, as of Season 4, the Smart Rifle has 6 overclocks with a balanced split of 2 of each category. Next, as always, we'll go through each of them and talk about what they do and how you can use them effectively. So with that, let's start with the clean overclocks, and the first one on the list is Eraser. The description reads, clean up the Ks with an extended magazine combined with the ability to acquire more locks. So this one is pretty simple as it just gives you a bigger magazine and extra targets to lock onto. Breaking it down, it gives you plus 12 to your magazine size and increases the number of max locks by about 33%, which maths out to 4 extra maximum targets. So this overclock is pretty standard as far as clean overclocks go, and if you're looking for something that safely increases your damage output, this wouldn't be a bad option. It not only gives you more shots to fire in each magazine, but more opportunities to use those shots. It's a simple overclock that doesn't do anything fancy, but also doesn't rob the weapon of any value in any way. The other option you have for clean overclocks is Armor Breaking Module. This one reads, shots do extra damage against armor when all locks are engaged. This one is an interesting option because it does not give the weapon any actual stat changes and simply adds more damage against armor when all locks are engaged. Now the game doesn't give you an actual value for armor damage stat, and for the life of me I could not find any actual indication of how much more damage you do using this overclock. However, in practice I do notice a good amount of extra damage towards enemy armor. This can be decently useful to run when doing an elimination mission, for example, to help you with the Dreadnought armor. The only issue with this is that you have to make sure your shots are angled to hit the armor since the weapon doesn't auto-target weak spots. If you're running this, you want to try to keep the maximum number of locked targets low, that way you can get the extra armor damage applied consistently and quickly. Overall, it's not a bad overclock, but personally I would probably take something else if available. Moving over to the balanced overclocks, first we have explosive chemical rounds. This one reads, every enemy with 3 locks triggers an explosion on the last shot. This one is an interesting one as it gives your shots an explosive component to them if you apply enough locks to the target. Breaking it down, it gives you the explosive rounds buff at the cost of -5 to your damage and -36 to your maximum ammo reserves. So to explain the chemical rounds themselves a little bit better, it causes targets with 3 or more locks on them to trigger an explosion on the last shot locked onto them, or the locked on shot that kills the enemy, dealing good area damage and applying a fear chance in a radius around them. So essentially, this overclock can give you significant damage output and area coverage if you use it well. If you burst fire using quick segments of locks, you can trigger the explosions very easily and cause heavy damage over a good area. It's also very good for dealing good chunk damage to tough enemies that are giving you trouble. Basically, this is a very good overclock choice if you want to really up your damage as well as have some crowd control capabilities. The next balanced overclock we have is Seeker rounds. The description says, locked shots will always hit their target, even finding their way around heavy armor, and the system can maintain locks at a more extreme angles. However, the extra processing load reduces the rate of fire for locked shots, and more care must be taken when reloading the advanced rounds. So this overclock does a lot of different things. Explaining it simply, it makes your shots fire slower, but makes them always hit their mark, even bypassing armor and terrain. Quickly going over the stat changes, it applies the Seeker round bonus to the weapon and also increases the threshold of losing locks by 33%, meaning you can aim more without the fear of losing your lock-ons. As a drawback, you have a slightly longer reload time, and although the stat page doesn't show it, it also applies a 47% slower fire rate. So personally, I find this overclock to be very useful in most cases. On one hand, making it so that your shots never miss and bypass armor is very useful, especially if you are doing an elimination, for example. The biggest issue with the Smart Rifle in my experience is having to position yourself to hit the enemy properly. This overclock essentially removes that limitation and allows you to be more flexible with your movement. The slower rate of fire can make the gun seem a lot slower, but I feel as though the increase in damage is well worth the trade. If you want to both increase your damage output and remove some of the positioning worries the Smart Rifle has, then this is the overclock for you. Now it's time to move to the unstable overclocks. The first one for the Smart Rifle is the Executioner. The description reads, tweaks to the fire control mechanism and camera software bring lightning fast lock acquisition and more weak spot damage when all locks are used. However, the maximum number of locks is reduced, as is the magazine and total ammo capacity. So this overclock turns the Smart Rifle into a single target deletion machine. It sacrifices ammo and number of targets for a faster lock on time and significant increase in damage. Breaking down the numbers, it applies the weak point damage buff and reduces the lock on time by 50%. Meaning you will reach full lock-ons faster. The trade-off being -12 to both your magazine size and max ammo reserves, and 33% less max targets, which maths out to about 4 less targets you can lock onto. So this overclock is adept at dealing insane damage to a single target. It's for when you really want one specific thing to die very, very fast. If you pair this up with the unstable lock mechanism mod, you can do some insane damage to single targets and just delete things from existence. You need to be a little bit more aware of your ammo consumption when using this, however, so it might be best to use these on missions with high value targets and play the role of big game hunter, if you will. In any event, it's an extremely useful and extremely fun overclock that will let you take out annoying tough enemies with extreme ease. The last unstable overclock option is Neuro Lasso. This one reads, slow down enemies by locking onto them. The more locks, the slower the enemy gets. The downside is a slower lock-on rate, and the locks can only be maintained for a short time before the system resets. So this one is very interesting because it gives a very strong amount of crowd control to the Smart Rifle in a unique way. It gives the lock-ons the ability to slow enemies down at the cost of a longer lock-on time and limited lock-on duration. To be specific, it applies a slowdown debuff while both increasing the time to lock on by 15% and limiting the maximum time you can keep your locks applied to 5 seconds. So talking about the slowdown effect itself, it causes each lock on an enemy to slow it down by 10%. Now this effect can stack, but there is a limit of 10 stacks per enemies, which if you math it out results in a 65% max slowdown for one creature. So this overclock can be very useful for keeping annoying or fast enemies in check. The debuff applies when the lock-ons occur, so you don't even need to fire any shots in order to apply the effect. This means that the more you focus on attacking a single enemy, the more trouble that enemy will have at being able to attack you. If you pair this up with the electric generator mod, you can apply slows using both the lock-ons and the shots themselves, since they will apply the electrocute effect. Basically, if you want to be the crowd control master of the bugs, then the Neuro Lasso is a perfect pick for you.
Turrets and explosions. You've come to the right place, mate.
So with all of these overclocks a bit more explained, hopefully you have a better idea of how to use the Smart Rifle to great effect. Smart Rifle can be a very intimidating weapon at first because it functions so differently than any of the other weapons in the game. Don't let the insane sci-fi futuristic looking style of this weapon scare you, because the Smart Rifle has many different applications that it can be used for, whether that be boss deletion with the executioner, area control with the chemical rounds, or even just versatility using the eraser. The Smart Rifle may be a bit hard to get used to at first, but take your time and learn its tricks and you will see why it's the best engineer primary. Well, that covers the Smart Rifle and the overclocks it has access to and how you can use them to great effect. Now you can decide if the Smart Rifle is the right primary option for your build. If you guys like this and want to see more videos covering the weapon overclocks, let me know down below. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video helpful. Please give it a thumbs up because it tells me what types of videos you guys want to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time for another video.